And then we're off. All right, so going back to the share. All right, so any questions regarding car legal hotline? Okay. Sometimes you can also leave your contact information, and within that same day or the following day, you'll get a call from an attorney that will be answering your questions. Okay. Now, I want to emphasize, the risk management section, right, which goes into the legal tools that we have. Now, when you go to risk management section, it provides you with the legal tools, okay, which most, if not all of the stuff that I talk about usually is within this area here. Then it talks about and dives deep into the purchase agreement. As I said earlier, December is going to be where we're going to get new contracts added to ZIP forms, and we're going to have some revised contracts as well. There's 14 total revisions, and I believe there's 10 or 9 new contracts being added. The one that is very exciting for me is the buyer representation agreement. That form is going to replace the 3 BRE forms, the BRE, the BRENN, and the BRNE form. These 3 will be completely deleted from ZIP forms, and now it only be one form. And the cool thing about it is you can also be one of the first to actually adopt, review, and look at some of the new contracts that are in question. So before we get into that section, I want to talk to you about the legal tools that you have, right? And here there's a lot of information, a lot of stuff that you can reference and utilize, because remember, these are forms that have been created by the California Association of Realtors. Now, CAR also with the Department of Real Estate, DRE, they work side by side to provide the initial tools that you need in order for you to do your job, right? Now, the cool thing about this section here is all of the different resources that you have, such as negotiating repairs, cyber crimes and real estate industry, referral fees, chain transaction, team names, square footage, lot size, agent visual inspection disclosure forms, disclosure of death, consumer recovery amount, seller cancellation of a purchase agreement, how to rebate a commission to a buyer, contingencies and contingency removal. Let's skip that. Tax cuts and job, let's skip that. Privacy and surveillance, transfer disclosure, statement law overview, buyer request for repairs. So it goes on and on and on and on. And the cool thing is some of them are quick guide, some of them are actual slides. So if we were to go to missing contract related time periods, you can download the actual presentation, and you can also download the quick guide, legal affecting the missing contracts related to time periods, right? This goes diving deep into the initial process of contingency removals, acceptance, the timelines, the days after, business, when it falls on a weekend or a holiday, when does that contingency fall into place, right? You can download it as part of your tools. I would also emphasize maybe creating a folder, right? And then just throw all of these resources into it. And I remember many, 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 many years ago, this is even before technology, when we had, internet and all these platforms, my mentor would always say, look, get everything, get a 3-ring binder and just start putting everything in there and use it as a resource and a reference. So I would have tabs on it, and then I would go back. It's just a lot easier to have something where you can go immediately into a folder or a folder or a document on your computer, and now you have all this instead of going through the internet trying to find the sections, then researching the the specific question that you have, right? That's why it's good to have a folder where you just throw everything into the folder and everything is all systemized in there where you can now resource and reference a lot of the stuff. Okay, any questions regarding this particular section? Okay, now let's go into, the new forms. I usually just type in new forms. And that takes you into this section where it says new forms and revisions. Okay, click on that. Here is where it's going to provide you with all the updated forms that are being created twice a year, once in June, and then a second one in December. The cool thing is right here, see this section here, December 2022, quick summary. Okay, you click on that, that's going to take you to the actual forms. Here's June. Remember, I mentioned to you, there's always 2 updates every year, typically happens in June, and then the last month of the year, which is December. You click on that, that's going to take you to this section here. These are all the new forms that have been created for December's release. These are all the revised forms that are being either added language or deleted language from a specific form, which is your SCO, which is your seller counter offer, and your SMCO, which is your seller multiple counter offer. There's been added or revisions to the form. Okay, so let's dive in deep into the quick summary of our legal tools, right? Here it gives you a synopsis of what the December 2022 form release quick summary is. And it says right here, this is for the week of what? December 19th of 2022. This is the week that is scheduled to be released and uploaded into your zip forms. That's when you'll probably see the new and the revised documentation. So what I like about this is because I can now reference of what is being done, okay? And what it says for the RPA, residential purchase agreement, it says that these are the new revisions that are being implemented into the purchase agreement, okay? And this was also revised in June of 2022. Now, also what you're going to see with the new revisions into your zip forms is that all of the documents will have a specific date. When you see the date, you should see the most current forms available. So if it's a new revision, you're probably going to see December 12 of 22. Okay, that's going to tell you you have the most updated form. If you use the desktop version, and if you don't update it, it's still going to provide you with the old form. You want to make sure that you're constantly updating all of your zip forms, so that way you have the most current information on hand. Okay, so what I'm really super excited about is this form right here, BRBC, Buyer Representation and Broker Compensation Agreement. This is a new form. If you see right here, it illustrates that it's a new form, okay? The cool thing is that it also gives you a quick synopsis of what the explanation or illustration of what's happening with that specific form. Now, remember, as professional real estate agents that you all are, the important is to be always on top of all of your positions when it comes to, your forms, your contracts, right? It makes you look professional. It makes you look like you know what you're doing. And more so, you are, on top of, 50 to 60% of the agents out there that are barely getting in the trenches. Most will probably not see this till next year. I can assure you that. This is why you have to constantly be on the lookout every single week to kind of see what's going on. Now, I did give you an answer to 2 things. I said that the forms are updated twice a year, right? And I said that they're updated in June and they're also updated in December. So let's dive into, oops, my bad. Okay, let's dive into the quick summary on the buyer representation agreement. And what does it illustrate here? So the form replaces the exclusive buyer representation agreement, better known as the BRE. It also the non-exclusive buyer representation agreement, BRNE, and the non-exclusive not for compensation buyer representation agreement, better known as the BRNN. The new form does not have a not for compensation option. Okay, so what it says right there, folks, and this is again very important because I'm seeing a lot of agents lose opportunities. And this is why a lot of the brokers are very excited to see this new form. And why do I want to emphasize on this form? It's because I want to protect you. You know, I want to make sure that you are getting paid for, you know, services rendered, right? We as professionals are constantly out there, you know, hitting the trenches, working, showing, negotiating, right? And the last that we don't want is for this buyer to go into an open house and then that agent unfortunately lures them and says, look, come and work with me. I'll get you the property, right? I mean, I'm going far and deep into that, but that is reality. And buyers sometimes will not be very unethical and honest with you, right? And they do things, unfortunately, that puts a bad taste in our mouth. So how do you protect yourself is, you know, having the right documentation, reinforcing, articulate, explaining how these forms work, because now it's easier for me to help support your position and then go after and fight for you. You don't have an agreement, you don't have paper trail, it's going to be very far and few for me to help or even legal, because that's the first thing they're going to ask. Did you have a document in place, signed and executed by the consumer? And if the answer is no, well, the other person that got the client probably did, you know. And how do we challenge that position, right? How do we go and you know, fight for a commission when we don't even have documentation in place? And it's all skill sets. At the end of the day, it's all in how you deliver the conversation, right? You're consulting with buyers, you're consulting with sellers, because it goes both ways. It goes, you know, with the buyers and your responsibility and your duties to, you know, protect the client, but it also with the sellers as well, right? But we see issues that happen, that there's a fallout, a disconnect, and how do you navigate that? And ultimately, if you are to be earn a commission, how do we protect that from you losing that, right? While paper trail, documentation, having them sign these agreements. This is why these forms were created, for that reason. So now that we explain a little bit of the buyer representation agreement, what it is, it removes three of the forms, right? The non-compensation, the non-exclusive, and then also the exclusivity of the BRE, which is the one that typically has been used 90% of the time over the other two forms. Now, paragraph 1, unlike the listing agreement, which ends on a date certain, the buyer representation period lasts for the number of days specified. Also, paragraph 4B1, the form defaults to a non-exclusive representation, meaning that the broker is only entitled to be paid if the buyer purchases a property for which there was a broker involvement, meaning that if you presented a property, right, and you were the one that initiated that opportunity, and you showed that property or submitted an offer, then you have recourses to earn a commission if this buyer goes in a different direction. Now, I want to emphasize, I want to stress, if you don't have this buyer representation and broker compensation agreement, it's going to be hard to really fight for a commission, right? Let's go into paragraph 4B2. The optional paragraph creates an exclusive representation, meaning that the broker is entitled to be paid if the buyer purchases the property during the presentation period with or without the broker's help. Meaning, if you create this form, and again, I just want to stress on the legality of this, right? I said earlier, we don't talk legal, but we can enforce our position by what the document says, and that's perfectly fine. But what this paragraph states, it says that even though you may not be the person that submitted an offer, but because you have this agreement in place, we might be able to entitled to a commission. Okay, that's simple. You have the buyer acknowledge, you have the buyer understand what they're signing, and they initial and sign this and date it. Now you have what's called a binding agreement. That binding agreement now reinforces your position. Now, remember, there's two sides to this, right? There's your side, and then there's the buyer side. And if you do anything and everything to protect that relationship, then it's going to be even harder for that buyer to not have the navigations to not earn a commission. So I just want to stress the position is there has to be some type of work environment position, meaning showing, negotiating, and presenting offers. There has to be some type of work involved in order. Just because they sign this, they can come back and says, look, Simon never showed me any property. Simon was very hard to get a email of. He wouldn't return my calls, wouldn't return my text messages. I would send emails and he would never respond to my emails, and ended up going in an open house. Now, if they can position themselves and say, look, Simon did not do their fiduciary responsibility, right? This is why the agency disclosure is very important as part of that process, right? And the cool thing, folks, is that when you prepare the buyer representation agreement, it immediately populates the agency disclosure, which goes hand in hand, right? Both the agency and the buyer representation agreement. Now, paragraph 4B2, the optional paragraph creates that exclusive representation, as I said, meaning that the broker is entitled to be paid if the buyer purchases the property during the period. There has to be a beginning date and there has to be an expiration date, right? But there's also more than that, this buyer representation agreement that I really like. And, a lot of the brokers that run large real estate companies, they also stress, how this one is really going to help you protect your commission from agents and also from buyers that go different directions, right? You probably heard the phrase, buyers are liars, right? And for the most part, that's what we see a lot. They're not loyal, they're not committed, and they will cheat on you, okay? Meaning if someone else gives them that flashy diamond that makes sense, they may go in a different direction. Now, if you anchor that, sit with them, consult with them, and really give them your value proposition of why you are the best agent for representing the client, then they're not going to cheat. They're going to know that you are a professional. They're going to know that you're committed. They're going to know that you're going to go above and beyond in helping, the consumer find, identify, negotiate, close the deal for them. Okay. Paragraph 4C, this paragraph allows the buyer or the seller to cancel the agreement. Paragraph D, 4D1, this paragraph retains the language from the previous buyer representation contract that credits against the buyer's compensation. So here's where I hear a lot of the consumers, the buyers, agents say, look, the reason I don't sign these agreements is because the buyer's afraid to sign. Okay. It's too much, and the buyers do not want to sign a written agreement. Well, let me ask you this question, and I'm going to be very blunt with this. Would you go on a listing appointment without getting a listing agreement signed? The answer is no, right? You would not go through the level of time, effort, and energy and not get the listing agreement signed and executed, right? One, you cannot list the property, you cannot promote a property without the written consent of the seller. Why can't you do that with a buyer? Then you get upset, not you on the call, but I'm saying in general, buyers agents get very, very upset is why did this buyer go with another agent, and now they're trying to throw the blame. You need to do a self-reflect and realize, did you give the best customer service? Were you there, helping and supporting your clients? Were you addressing their questions? Were you responding to any of their calls, text messages, or emails? All those are big contributors on why the consumer ends up going a different direction, because they don't see the value. So I want to emphasize the important is, what is your value proposition when representing a buyer? Now, with everything that we're seeing right now, right, the market being the way it is, right, interest rates climbing, is it still a good time to buy? The answer is absolutely 100%. Okay. And how you present that is really your skill sets, right? And how you deliver the powerful presentation, right? No difference than when we talk about going on a listing appointment, right? Have you not presented or role played or practiced with someone on a listing appointment, right? You go through the motions. Okay, this is X, Y, and Z. This is what I'm going to do, what I'm going to say. And then more so at the end of the conversation, did you deliver a powerful, powerful presentation where there's no hesitation, no doubt on the seller, they're ready to sign? And if there is any type of objections, were you able to address those objections? Okay. Because what I can tell you, the top performers out there go in and come out with the listing agreement signed. Now, does that mean you're going to get all of the listing appointments you go on? No. Does that mean that you're going to get all of the buyer consultations that you go on? No. Okay. But if you start building your skill sets, you're going to be able to really articulate and, really provide that value where they're not going to know how to maneuver. They're going to say, well, you know what? You are the best agent, Are you giving it and rating yourself from a scale of 1 to 10? 10, absolutely, you're willing to work with me. And you cannot say 7, right? Ask the consumer, what do they grade you on your performance, your position? Do they trust you? Do they like you? Can you provide the level of service to help them achieve their goals, right? And what is that? Is to be able to find that, that dream home, the home that they've been desiring for many, many, many years, right? That's our job. We are dream makers, right? We help the consumers find, identify, and negotiate their homes. Okay. So, any questions regarding so far the buyer representation agreements? All right, let's continue. Part of the legal tools and a quick reference is, the additional form. This is another form that is new, okay, which is the ABCD form. Ironically, right? ABCD. Anticipated broker compensation disclosure. Folks, this is a new form that's coming up in December, okay? This is a 3-part form. Part 1 advises the buyer that the seller payment of compensation direct to a buyer's broker or indirectly through the seller's broker may impact the price that the seller will accept, and that the buyer's broker will disclose on a property by property basis the compensation promised broker through the MLS or elsewhere. Part 3 is where the buyer broker disclosure the final compensation and receives. So the cool thing about this also, you get to see samples of all of these forms, and I'm going to share with you that. But let me just go real quick through all of the new forms. The BTA form, Buyer Transactional Advisory. new form. This is going to be another form that is going to be part of the disclosure process. The form is a bundle with the BRBC, which is the buyer representation agreement, right? The new form, and it gives the buyer more information about the agent's responsibilities and those things a buyer needs to take care of. Okay. The COBR form, cancellation of buyer's representation. With that also, the buyer has the right to exercise their position not to work with you, which again, this is a new form that was created because the consumer says, well, we have a buyer representation agreement, but there is no way that if I'm not happy with this agent, how do I cancel my fiduciary duties with this agent that is not performing, right? Well, the California Association of Realtors created this form, cancellation of buyer representation agreement. And again, here's your position when a consumer is out there in a very distraught position, right? Now, we don't poach other agents' clients, right? That is not the nature, and it's an ethical practice not to be poaching other consumers' clients, right? But with that being said, you can ask questions, and if the person is willing to give that information, then it's okay. We just cannot force someone to say, hey, leave Simon, come and work with me. I will take care of you, right? Because if that other agent finds out that Simon was poaching on the consumer or the agent, well, they can send out a ethics complaint against you, and it's part of the articles of the ethics, right? And that's the last thing that you don't want, is to be tagged as an unethical professional, right? And there's a lot of real estate agents, I hate to say it, that just do not practice moral and good common sense and looking for their own clients, right? But there's on occasions where the consumer has no choice. The agent went completely MIA, they missing in action, right? They're not servicing their clients, and the consumer is unhappy, right? And wants to find out what is the best avenue of solution. Well, then here's the resources that you can provide. Well, because you have a working relationship with this particular agent, I would emphasize and stress that there is a cancellation of that agreement, that allows the consumer the right to cancel and exercise their right if they don't see the value from that agent. And this is the form. So what the form stipulates is that this is a two-part form. Part one is where the buyer or the broker gives notice of cancellation. So either or, you can fire a consumer just as much as a consumer can fire you, okay? The part one is where the buyer broker gives notice of cancellation to the other. A signature is required in part one below paragraph 2. Paragraph 3 of the form identifies the compensation that would be due the buyer's broker. It revert back to the BRBC form and applies to any applicable property purchase or only those for which there was broker involvement, which can be identified in 3A2. Other compensation options include just expenses incurred. So the awesome part of it as well is if there is a mutual cancellation of this agreement. Now, I want to stress and I want to emphasize this form should be used on a regular basis. Well, Simon, I don't really work with buyers. Okay. Well, have you ever been in a transaction where you're the listing agent and your sellers are now purchasing a new property? Well, the answer is there you go. You are working with the buyer. Many of us have been in that particular scenario where they list a home and that seller sells the proceeds, sells the home and gets the proceeds of the seller, puts a down payment on their new purchase, right? And if they're moving here or living locally or planning to buy something locally, for the most part, because you have that relationship already in place, will probably use you as the buyer's agent. Well, you want to protect yourself as well, because if you don't have a written agreement, even though you have the relationship with them on the listing side, doesn't necessarily mean that you're entitled to a commission on the buy side. Remember, paper trail is your friend. Paper trail will help you in your position. It helps us to help you get your commission earned, right? So this is why it's very important that if there was any expenses occurred, now what it says is that the consumer can pay you for marketing expenses or any expenses that are reasonable, right? It has to be reasonable, and you have to have proof of what those reasonable fees are, right? If you spend money on some type of marketing or whatever the case may be, right? Well, the contract allows you to be compensated for those if the consumer decides to cancel. Okay. Any questions so far? Does all this make sense? I'm assuming that it does make sense, right? All right, so let's continue. Compensation includes your just expenses incurred, broker receiving a referral fee, broker getting paid from the seller, or non-compensation as well. So notice a broker identified properties, NBIP, right? This form is also a new form. The form would be used at the termination of the buyer representation period if a protection period was provided, or within 5 days after the buyer or broker cancels the buyer representation agreement. Okay, what does that mean? Okay, well, what it means is that no difference than a listing, right? You get the listing, congratulations, you got the listing for 6 months. Within 2 months of getting that listing, the seller says, well, you know what, I have a change of heart. I cannot find a property, therefore I think I'm just going to settle and not sell my property after all. Well, what if you incurred cost? And no fault to you as the listing agent. Your goal is to help them sell the property, right, for the highest possible, with the least amount of headache, to net them the most. But we have no control, right? We can't force a seller to sell a property just as much as we cannot force a buyer to buy a property. So the notice of buyer identifying properties form is used when the termination of the buyer representation agreement, if a protection period was provided, or within 5 days after a buyer or broker cancels. So basically, it's an exclusion list, okay? An exclusion. So no difference than a listing agreement. This is what's so cool about all these new forms that are coming up. And this is why I'm so excited, because it alleviates a lot of the headaches and the unfortunate aspect of why agents work so darn hard, and we don't get paid for services sometimes rendered, right? Time, showing, presenting, preparing, marketing, right? We don't get paid. So these are just little leverages that allows you to be able to get compensated for services rendered. So no difference than an exclusion list when you provide a seller, right? The seller decides to cancel. Okay, Mr. Seller, here's the list of everyone that has submitted an offer, including their agents, have seen the property during an open house. This is why you need to have concise paper trail, right? Every time you do an open house, are you providing a registry, right? Anyone that walks in that house, are you asking for their names, their phone numbers, their email? And if you're not, I encourage you to do so, because if not, and this particular person saw the property, did not buy with you or during your listing period, but then you lose the listing or gets canceled, this buyer comes back, buys the property, well, you don't have any recourse. Whereas if you did have the name of that consumer and you presented that list to the seller, Mr. and Mrs. Seller, here's the list of everyone that has seen it, submitted an offer, or any marketing that you can navigate that this person was shown the property, or you can identify that person that was or got knowledge of your listing, then you can file for a commission. Okay, so what this does is the reverse. So now instead of a seller providing that list, the buyer's agent can now present that as an exclusion list. So if there's a termination, you terminating the buyer or the buyer terminating your relationship, right? Now you can provide this notice of broker identify properties, meaning that this form you're going to give as part of the cancellation, a buyer representation agreement, you're also going to send this as part of the agreement, that here's all the properties that you've seen, okay? Or emails of all the properties that you have given. And if the consumer buys any of these properties you've shown, or was a direct of you setting some type of marketing and you can prove it, then we can go after a commission. Okay, you can go after a commission. So the SPBB, seller payment for buyer's broker. This is a new form. Okay, part of the purchase agreement, RPA, if checked under section 3G as in George, paragraph 3, this form will be used to identify the amount of compensation the buyer is asking the seller to pay the buyer's broker. The buyer's broker will not receive double payments. Okay, so basically it identifies your position on seller paying buyer's broker, if that's the case. So if it's checked, not just the buyer representation agreement says that if the buyer did sign a BRE form and the the buyer goes in a different direction, we can go after the consumer, the buyer, for compensation, not the agent, but the buyer. What this form stipulates now is that it doesn't matter who brings us the earned commission, if it's the consumer, the buyer, or the seller. And what that emphasizes is allows the seller to pay the buyer's broker who represented this buyer at one point a commission. But what it also emphasizes that you will not be paid two commissions. So if the buyer's going to pay you, then the buyer is going to pay you. If the seller on this particular transaction, because you were the point of contact and the buyer ended up buying this property that you shown or submitted an offer, then the seller can also reimburse you your compensation. All right, so the lease listing agreement, the LL form, it's just revisions. The property management agreement, there's revisions. The rental property owner disclosure, this is a new form. Okay, this form is formatted, I should say, like a SPQ for a rental property owner. The RPOD asks about the owner's knowledge for statutory disclosures such as pest control, lead-based paint, death on the property. So this is, again, because the lease agreements are unique, these are not purchases. There's also material facts regarding tenants moving into the property. So this is where this form comes into play. So this is going to be another checklist for your TC and compliance, that they need to add this rental property owner disclosure as part of the initial process of checklist of items for you to be paid a commission. Residential lease monthly rental agreement has been revised. Oops, what happened here? My apologies. Any questions? Sorry about that. Let's see if I can go back. Here we go. Okay. All right, so we were here, rental property owner disclosures. Residential lease month-to-month agreement has been revised. The MIMO form, move in, move out, there's been a revision. Pre-move out inspection statement, there's been a revision to that. Notice of right to inspect prior to termination of tenancy. Application to lease, rental screening fee, there's been a revision to that. NCOA, non-contingent offer advisory, right? This is a new form that, like the existing MCA form, right? The market condition advisory. This new form notifies the buyer of the risk associated with making an offer without a contingency. Now, these particular, I think this form came out a little too late, right? This would have been nice to have this form a year and a half to 2 years ago, when we saw very low interest rates, right? And a lot of buyers submitting offers, and sellers and listing agents putting non-contingent offers, right? Say, hey, sellers requesting that you release appraisal, release, physical inspections, loan contingencies, right? Well, this form will suffice the risk involved if a consumer or a buyer decides to go with a non-contingent offer, meaning we're going to buy the property as is, we're going to release any and all or certain contingencies. Okay, and I'll illustrate it in a little bit how that form looks like. Solar advisory and questionnaire. This is a new form. The BCO, the CC, the CCPA, the ETA, the extension of time addendum or amendment. There's been modifications to it. The manufacturer home, manufacturer transfer disclosure, lease after sale, seller's counter, and multiple counter offer. Okay, so now let me go into the actual forms itself. Okay, you're not going to see it on zip forms just yet, but where you are going to see it is on let's see. Where is that form? Recent downloads. No, I had them here somewhere. Okay, better yet, I can do this.
I think they were all on there, Simon.
They were?
Yeah, they just said draft through them, but they were on there for you to look at each of them.
Yeah, I know that you can download them. Let me go back. Thank you. So go here. There we go. Yeah, this is it. All right, so let's look at I think this is the buyer representation agreement. Oh no, this is my apologies. ETA, CCC. No, wrong folder. Revise, yeah, right here. It should populate the forms. Sorry for the delay. Technology, right? All right. Here it is. All right, team. So here is an example of what the revised December 22 buyer representation and broker compensation agreement looks like. All right, so everything that is in red is was added to this form. Now, this is again a new form that is being created. as part of the buyer representation agreement. I'm not going to go deep into this conversation because we have less than 5 minutes in our presentation. But here's a sample that you can actually pull, save into a file, and gather this information so that way you kind of start getting acquainted with what the form is going to look like. And, with all the forms, the importance, right? The importance of understanding. And this is going to help navigate and ultimately allow us to go after commissions when a buyer decides to go in a different direction with another agent, right? So representation period and right to present. It has the beginning date, expiration dates, right? No difference in a listing agreement. It also says that by 11:59 p.m., this buyer representation agreement is void or expires, right? But then it goes to the non pre-existing buyer representation agreement. It goes property to be inquired, location, city, similar to what we saw on the exclusive buyer representation agreement, right? Then it goes into section 4 of compensation. The amount, rate, or real estate commission is not fixed by law. They're set by each broker, right? Then you're either going to do either a percentage or a flat fee. Then it goes into the broker's compensation. So the reason it's in black is that it's from the previous buyer representation agreement. They're just mirroring some of the stuff from the old form, and everything on red has been added to the new form. Okay, does that make sense? Okay. Cancellation of buyer representation agreement. What is the consequences? Either buyer or broker may cancel this agreement by giving notice to the other, right? So again, just understanding your position. Mediation terms, arbitration. Now the beauty is obviously if you feel that you're entitled to compensation from a buyer that went a different direction, bought a property, now we have obstacles and challenges that we now can go after procuring costs, right? Because that's the ultimate reason why you have these agents, why you have the consumers to sign these forms. It's for that purpose and protection. Because I know the time, effort, and energy that all agents put on a consumer for them just to go in a different direction. It just happened to one of our agents this week. And it was, thank goodness it was a small lease, but she still was very, very upset that one, the consumer did not give her any indicators that, they were going to go in a different direction. And her reasoning for that was that she went into and saw it on Zillow or on an app, and they were hosting an open house. That agent was the listing agent. And unfortunately, she didn't say that she was being represented by our agent. And I asked the agent, did you have a representation agreement in place? She said, no, I did not have one. So, unfortunately, even though we want to bat for you and help you navigate and get paid a commission, if we don't have the proper documentation in place, it's going to be very far and few and hard for us to even challenge. We can ask, but if the brokers are very in tune with the agreements, then the procuring cause really boils down to this. Who was the party who initiated the agreements, right? Was there an agency? Was there a buyer representation? Was there an application? Was there an offer presented? Who started the negotiating? All those weigh on the scale, right? And the more evidence, the more likelihood that you're going to win the case. So this is why, again, I stress that when you're having consulting appointments with consumers, right? Buyers and sellers, that you understand and explain and illustrate, what they're signing and acknowledging. Do you understand, Mr. and Mrs. Buyer? Do you understand, Mr. and Mrs. Seller, what you're signing? And if not, let me be that pillared of helping you explain this a little different or a little better. Okay. Any questions regarding any of the new forms? All right, so here's the cancellation of contract. Again, all of these can be downloaded into your computer so that way you have a reference of what's going on with the December release. The cancellation of listing, cancellation of contract and disposition of the deposit and cancellation of escrow. So again, if you look at this is December 2022. What they've added is these language into the contract, and more so the importance. And a lot of these are done because there's either a lawsuit, a pending claim, an arbitration. There's many reasons why these forms are created. And it's again an incentive. It's the what we call the pros and cons help the agents because it's a two-way street, right? It protects the consumer, which is the buyers, the sellers, the investors, the developers, but it also protects the agent itself. You know, if you're properly providing these forms, then there's no reason why we cannot fight for a commission, okay, or a listing per se. With that being said, it is 3 p.m. on the dot. Any final questions before we wrap it up? Okay, well, if there is any questions in the near future, by all means, please do not hesitate. Please reach out. I am here to help, and it's always, always great to see everyone. Take care. We'll see ya. Bye, Christine. Thanks, Mike. Good to see you.